Tom Hanks perfectly channels an icon of American childhood, Mr. Rogers. Hi there, welcome once again to Plain English, your recipe for success. I'm Jeff. The producer of this fine program is JR, and this is episode number 216. You can find all the episode resources for this episode at plainenglish.com/216. Coming up today, we are going to take a trip back in time to when we were all little kids. And by we, I mean anyone who grew up in the United States between 1968 and 2001. In a remarkable 31-year span, Fred Rogers hosted a television program for children called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I watched it. We all watched it. We grew up with Mr. Rogers. And now, several years after his death, he is portrayed on the big screen by none other than Tom Hanks in the new movie called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers is a very quotable guy, so I had no trouble selecting a quote for this week, and our English expression is to get down to business. So now it's time for us to get down to business, the very serious business of children's TV. Won't you be my neighbor? This simple question is one that generations of American children recognize as the gentle invitation they received from Fred Rogers, the host of a television program called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The theme song asks, "Won't you be my neighbor?" And it always asserts that it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. And that is the title of a new movie starring Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Before we talk about the movie, I want to tell you a bit about the show. I watched Mr. Rogers as a kid. Everyone I knew watched it. He was the television neighbor to generations of kids in an era before YouTube, in an era before cable television, and the fragmented media we have today. Over a 31-year run, spanning from 1968 to 2001, Mr. Rogers looked into the camera and spoke directly to children as equals in 912 half-hour episodes. 912 episodes. And he didn't talk down to the children, to us, and he didn't sound like a typical adult. He invented a little world called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he invited all the country's children to be his neighbor. And as our neighbor, he educated us, comforted us, and taught us how to experience and handle the difficult world around us. Let me give you an example. What does it mean when someone has to go to the hospital? Many of us are born in hospitals, but as children, we don't really know what it means when an adult has to go to a hospital. This is the kind of topic that Mr. Rogers would explore on the show. Why can that person not be at home? Is that person going to die? Is that person permanently broken? Why is everyone acting so differently when someone is in the hospital? Mr. Rogers would look us right in the eye and he would explain to us in words we could understand what it meant when an adult had to go to the hospital. He wouldn't sugarcoat it. He wouldn't lie like so many adults do and say that everything will be okay. But he would explain it with compassion and he would talk to us about how we should feel and react to a situation like this. He would tell us what it feels like to be the person in the hospital and what the other adults around us are probably thinking and feeling. And so it would go week in and week out. He talked about war. He talked about assassination. He talked about divorce. He talked about why some people use wheelchairs. In fact, he invited a quadriplegic on the show to explain how he uses his wheelchair. He talked about people's talents and why it was important to nurture and develop your own talents, why it was good to have dreams and ambitions, why different people have different types of talents, and why we should all accept people as they are. And he addressed things of burning importance to children, such as, is it possible to fall down the drain of a bathtub? Should you be afraid of getting a haircut? How does a clock know what time it is? So here's how a typical show would go. The show would open with an animated view of a neighborhood, and you would see a trolley go by from left to right. And after the opening, Mr. Rogers would walk in the door of his living room set as if he were just getting back from work. He would see you and say hello. He'd take off his suit coat and hang it up in the closet. He was always wearing a dress shirt and tie underneath. He'd then put on a cardigan sweater and approach the camera. He'd sit on a bench chatting with you the whole time and take off his dress shoes and put on his sneakers, resting each foot on the opposite knee as he tied his shoes. And then he would get down to business, talking about the main topic. He'd often show you a picture or bring a prop. Once he walked with a cane and showed off a bandaged ankle and talked about what it meant to be injured. You get the idea. A variety of other characters made regular appearances on the show, including puppets and the mailman. He encouraged us to use our imaginations and always took us to the land of make-believe, where it was safe to pretend and explore our imaginations. The movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, was released on Thanksgiving weekend here in the US, starring Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, and he was really good. It wasn't a typical biopic. In fact, Mr. Rogers wasn't even the main character. Instead, the movie tells the story of an investigative journalist for Esquire magazine, Lloyd Vogel. He's assigned to write a puff piece, a lighthearted, not-so-serious short article about Mr. Rogers. And this journalist resents the assignment. He thinks he's too good an investigative reporter to be writing about a children's TV host. But he develops an unlikely friendship with his interview subject, and instead of delivering his short puff piece, he wrote what became a very famous article about how Mr. Rogers connected with people of all types, how he nurtured the talents of his young viewers, how he encouraged them to find their place in the world. And at the same time, the grown-up writer himself learned important lessons from the children's TV host. You can read the article today, the article that was the source material for the movie, and I'll link to it at this point in the transcript online. The movie was very good. You don't need to know about Mr. Rogers to enjoy it. Like I said, it's only partly about him, but I do need to tell you that Mr. Rogers is an institution with American children, or at least those of us who were children when he was on the air. Everyone loved him. Everyone who watched him loved him. He was on the air, like I said, from the late 60s until the early 2000s. But I would say if you have an American colleague or friend who is between the ages of, say, 30 and 50, which I definitely am, I'm right in the middle, not quite the middle of that range. But if you have a friend in that age range, you should ask that person whether they watched Mr. Rogers as a kid or not. Honestly, it didn't matter where you were, what your family was like. Kids everywhere watched him. You could be growing up in a tall apartment building in Manhattan, or you could be on a farm in North Dakota. Children of every race, every socioeconomic status, every type of family, every type of situation, we all watched Mr. Rogers. And I don't think we'll ever have anyone else like him again, media and technology being what they are today. He was a really unique individual. Well, 'tis the season for year-end summaries and wrap-ups and such on social media. And Spotify is doing this thing where it shows you what you've listened to over the course of the last year. And I got 2 listeners who sent me screenshots of their year-end summaries on Spotify. First was Miriam from Mexico, who sent me a screenshot saying she listened to 1,768 minutes of podcasts this year, and the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 podcast logo on her stream was plain English. So congratulations on a productive year of English learning to Miriam from Mexico. Another listener shared his or her screenshots as an Instagram story and mentioned me, but the story disappeared from my feed before I could write down the listener's name, and I feel terrible about it. But regardless, this is just further proof of how much English you all are practicing, and I want to say thank you and congratulations on all your hard work in 2019. Today's expression is to get down to business. It's an informal expression that you use when you transition from an icebreaker or social activity to the main reason you're meeting with someone. I said earlier that each episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood opened with Mr. Rogers coming through the door, replacing his suit jacket with a sweater, changing his shoes, and chatting with the audience. Then he got down to business. That's the point at which he began the main content of the program. Now, when an episode of Plain English starts, you might be waiting to hear a sound like this, which is your signal that we're about to get down to business talking about the main topic. If you meet with colleagues, it's common for people to chit-chat a little as people are coming in the door. How was your weekend? What's your family up to? How far are you into the new season of The Crown on Netflix? What? You haven't started it? But you watched the first 2 seasons, right? Okay, good. You know the cast on this season is different, right? Yeah, it takes place years in the future. Oh yeah, I did hear about that. How the male actor was making so much more money than the female actor, even though the female actor played the queen. Talk about an Let's get down to business. Let's start this meeting. That's what you say when you want people to stop talking about the crown and focus on the purpose of the meeting. Let's get down to business, you'd say. You can also use this phrase more generally to mean that someone started thinking about something seriously or with determination. You might say a football team didn't score in the entire first half, but as soon as the second half started, they got down to business and they scored twice within the first 10 minutes. They got down to business because they finally showed some determination. They finally started to focus and produce. Here's the quote of the week. Probably no surprise that I picked one from Fred Rogers. This quote was featured in the movie. Tom Hanks speaks it, but it is an actual quote from the real Mr. Rogers. Here it is. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It can sometimes be easier to forgive our enemies than our friends. It can be hardest of all to forgive people we love. Indeed, that is true. That's all for today. Thanks for joining us. There's also a documentary about Mr. Rogers called simply Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and that is on some of the streaming platforms. I haven't seen that one yet. Actually, you know what it's called? It's called Won't You Be My Neighbor? That's the name of the documentary. But I haven't seen it. I'll try to make time for it in the next few weeks. But I'm really curious. Is there someone like Mr. Rogers in your country? Some adult on TV or radio, some adult who just did really good children's programming? If there is, I'd love to know about it. So leave a comment at plainenglish.com/216 and leave a link so we can see who it is. By this time, we know the winner of the big election in the UK. Well, I don't know it because I'm recording this beforehand, but you all know who it is, and we will delve into that subject probably on Thursday's episode. If not Thursday, then soon thereafter. By the way, Plain English Plus members know what soon thereafter means, and they know how to use it because it was the subject of a video lesson we did for episode 213 just 2 weeks ago. The video lessons are great for little phrases like that, soon thereafter. It's not really an expression, more like a tool in your toolbox. And our video lessons are full of tools like this for your English toolbox. If you want to be able to use these useful tools yourself, then come join us at plainenglish.com/plus, PLUS, and we will see you next time.